The issues that affect you, the problems we need to solve together. You're listening to Community Connection.
Conflict. It can be as big as warring nations to something on a much smaller level. Neighbors squabbling over a tree limb, disagreements between co-workers. But no matter the conflict, the emotions usually run high as both sides start off entrenched in their beliefs, emotions rise, and problems can happen. There's an organization in San Diego that helps people resolve conflicts. It was built on the principle that every dispute has a solution. It's the National Conflict Resolution Center. And today we're going to learn how to resolve conflict. Joining us on the Community Connection program today, the Director of External Relations for the National Conflict Resolution Center, Ashley Virtue. Also with us is Kathryn Shade. She's Senior Program Manager who shares the process of resolving whatever conflict she may or people experience. And Ashley and Kathryn, so much enjoy you being here today, and I'm looking so much forward, I'm sure as our listeners are, into how to resolve conflict, because it's one of those human things that happen, both from an organizational and human standpoint. We want to get into this. So, Ashley, why don't you tell us now, the National Conflict Resolution Center, how was it born exactly?
Oh, good question. And thanks. It's really great to be here. So our organization was actually founded in 1983. So we've been around for well over 3 decades, and we really started kind of with grassroots mediation services. So for those folks out there who are familiar with mediation, you know that it's a process where a neutral third party comes into a conflict to help resolve it. And mediation is used broadly from everything from neighborhood disputes to city councils pulling in mediators to internationally using mediators that are helping negotiate treaties between nations. So we really started grassroots doing community mediations in San Diego, but have grown to a national and even international organization through, we've always kept mediation as a mainstay staple of our services that we provide. Beyond simply in the community, although we still do pro bono community mediations. We do a lot of mediations in divorce and family law. We do mediations in with litigated cases. And we've also expanded and have a very robust training program. So we recognized 25 years ago that mediation was one thing, but empowering people with training skills so they could actually resolve conflicts on their own needed to be a part of our mission as well. And so developed a very robust training program where we now train all over the country, and again, even some internationally, in all different types of communication skills, inclusivity training, team management training, and conflict resolution training.
So when this all started, what kind of people started this organization? Was it somebody arguing with their neighbor? Was it somebody in government? Or just kind of tell us about the personal story of how it all started.
Well, the good news is it wasn't born out of a conflict. So the organization started really out of USD Law School. And so it was a partnership that came from people of the legal background who are saying there needs to be a better way for us to address some of the issues that are happening here in our city. And they took the approach that a lot of cases that were being referred to the courts could have been solved outside of the court system, saving the people involved a lot of time and money through that process. And also that there was a way to do it with more civility than being dragged through the court system. And so that's really how it started. And the folks who were behind it kind of came from a legal background, but quickly pulled in other alternative dispute resolution professionals. And before long, NCRC, which actually at the time was known as the San Diego Mediation Center, before it turned into the National Conflict Resolution Center, started with a broad volunteer base of mediators who were willing to commit their time to the important cause.
Now, Kathryn, you work through the organization, with the organization, as somebody who works in neighborhoods and helps these kind of disputes. When you first took this job, what prompted you to get involved in the organization?
Well, I've really been very interested in the work that they've done. I had taken trainings with NCRC when I was working
I
at
see.
other organizations. And so, I was just very, very interested in the work. And when I got the call, I had to come. Prior to this, actually, I was working in refugee resettlement. And so I took a training that they did at our offices with the staff, and some of the refugees were there. So I just knew it was like really important, particularly to see different groups coming together to have these conversations and being able to understand each other.
Sure, we can explore this more later in the program, but I mean, I'm sure there are all kinds of conflict, as we know, between peoples and cultures and backgrounds and all those things that kind of germinate into conflict. Let's define it. I want to define a couple of terms for our listeners who are listening. Yeah, conflict resolution, that sounds good. I want you to define, how do you define conflict resolution? How do you define what the resolution is? Define that a little bit and describe for our listeners what that means, what the goal is specifically.
So when you think about conflict, usually that carries a very negative connotation, and it probably doesn't always have to. So when you think about conflict resolution, it's the opportunity that surrounds conflict, is what I would say. Basically, conflict resolution is the way that people come together to find common ground on an issue that they disagree with and find ways to use that common ground as a building block to come together in some sort of resolution. And so what conflict resolution does not mean is that everyone agrees all the time and it's kumbaya and you leave feeling, like we're best friends now. But it's coming together to say, what do we ultimately need from this situation? And what's funny is that as you dive into conflict, oftentimes you realize those needs might not be as far apart as the two individuals think they are when they are starting the conflict. What do we need from the situation and how do we get there? So in a nutshell, I mean, conflict resolution is really just taking advantage, believing there's a solution and taking advantage of the opportunity to find some common ground and work towards a better goal.
And you said something interesting a moment ago, a resolution that everybody can agree on.
Yeah, there's elements to our legal system and the court process that are really important that involve a judge saying, this is what's going to happen. I've made a decision and this is where you're going. And for a lot of situations, that needs to happen, honestly. But for a lot of situations, it doesn't. And so the kind of key to a lot of the trainings that we work on and the mediations that we do is that the people there in the process are there voluntarily and they're bought into the solution. And so what we found is that when people are a part of the problem solving, they have a much higher buy-in to whatever that resolution is. And so much more so than you find with, say, a ruling that's been passed down through a judge or even an arbitrator in a situation, much more so than in those situations, the agreements that come out of a facilitated dialogue or a mediation are adhered to much stronger because the participants who came up with them believe in it, right? It was a voluntary process. They believe in it. They were part of creating it. And so they want to move forward with it.
And when it comes to being a mediator, Kathryn, what does it take to be a mediator? I can imagine that, okay, you're not emotionally involved in anything that might have occurred prior to your beginning this process, but you're still a human being, and you're trained, obviously, you train mediators to do this kind of mediation. Talk about that, what it's like to be a mediator and what it takes.
Sure. Well, first of all, you let them know that you're a neutral third party. And even though you have your biases, you absolutely cannot let your bias be known or to show. So first you get them each to state what their complaint is, right? And then they sort of repeat back to each other what they heard the other one say. And then you help them to come up with a resolution where you are helping them each to identify what they really needed. So, for example, a lot of times if you have a dispute between neighbors, right, it always ends up being about the way it was communicated. You're always parking on my side of the street or something like that, right? And it usually has to do with not so much the parking space, but you disrespected me, you didn't ask my permission, you know, something like that. So you get each of them to see what the underlying need is. And as Ashley said, it's often the same exact thing. I didn't like the way you communicated with me. You didn't do things the way I thought you should do them. So you get each of them to let go of just being right, because that's not going to resolve anything, and they each think they're going to be right. And you have them come to sort of a middle ground about agreeing, okay, in the future, if you have to park here, for example, could you please let me know? Or could you, knock on my door and have a conversation instead of sticking a nasty note on my windshield? So you help them see what the issue really is about, the mode of communication.
It's interesting. I'm sure people listening to you right now are thinking of that and a lot of other things like that you almost took people's words out of their mouth, probably, who are listening right now, and the way they react to something like that. It must take a lot of intensive training to go into a session like this, and don't allow yourself, obviously, you don't want to become enraged anyway or show a lot of emotion, I guess, but when you go into a mediation effort like this, do you immediately see somewhere that you want to take it, or it really depends on the two sides?
It absolutely depends on the two sides. You don't ever try to steer them in one direction or another. You might say something like, did you hear Ashley say such and such, whereas she may have made a statement where it shows that she's willing to compromise in some area. And then you can say, oh, did you hear Ashley say that she's sorry that she didn't put the note on your car, but, she's willing to do that in the future? And you help them to work their way towards the solution.
And going back to your question kind of about the intensive training it must take to be a mediator, I think that it's actually a skill that I wish more people would kind of take the training to experience. We offer a training at National Conflict Resolution Center that's a 4-day training. Mm-hmm. And in that time, you really do have this amazing experience of learning the process, but then really practicing it, because learning and practicing are completely different situations. And so what we find is that a lot of the folks who come through the training program are surprised by the transformation they've gone through personally. They may have come in because they work in human resources and they wanted, mediation is a clear, obvious skill you want in that job, or they're ombuds person, or they're a manager. But what they leave with is this new sense of communication style. And that then applies to what they're doing at home with their children and with their own neighbors and the parking spot situation. Mm-hmm. So it's really neat to kind of see mediators themselves go through training and then realize how it deeply transforms them.
So you're saying they discover something about themselves.
Absolutely, yeah.
That they use obviously in their own personal lives, right. I would imagine.
You kind of, once you learn the language, it's hard not to speak it.
And I imagine listening, obviously, a very important part of this, based on what you both have said so far. I want to talk more about that and also the kinds of people that have gone through this kind of training and how people can get involved in it. We're going to take a break right now in the Community Connection program, and then back with more about the National Conflict Resolution Center.
Life after military service is different. Many veterans find transitioning difficult, feeling lost and uncertain about the future. These feelings don't take away from a veteran's strength, courage, or sense of duty. If you're a veteran in crisis or know one who is, the power of one person, one connection, one act of compassion can make a difference. For free 24/7 confidential support, call the Veterans Crisis Line at 1-800-273-8255 and press 1, or visit veteranscrisisline.net.
Women, our lives are full and often overwhelming, leading to stress, anxiety, and even depression. You don't have to walk this alone. New Day Women's Center is a community for women to connect and grow, providing support, group activities, and quality counseling services at affordable rates. Scholarships are also available for counseling for women and children in crisis situations. If you could use support from women who understand what you're going through, please visit newdaywomencenter.com or call 619-713-1544.
Got a new tech device? Be sure to recycle your old one. The Consumer Electronics Association is making it easy to recycle your old TVs, tablets, and smartphones. Go to greenergadgets.org, type in your zip code, and you'll find the recycling center closest to your home. That's greenergadgets.org.
People coming together to find solutions. You're listening to Community Connection.
We're talking to the program today about the National Conflict Resolution Center. Our guest, Ashley Virtue. She's Director of the External Relations at that organization. And also with us is the Senior Program Manager, Kathryn Shade, who shares the process of resolving the kind of conflict that so many people experience. And let's talk about workplace conflict, because a lot of people who are listening right now are probably thinking, boy, that's, I know the home thing, and that's one thing. But the workplace conflict, especially in this day and age, where politics has become so divisive over the last 2-3 years here in our country, where people are really trying to avoid even talking about it. When you talk about workplace conflict, what's your goal in that situation? And are there managers and supervisors who go through this training, and employees? Are they recommended to take the training as well? Ashley?
Yeah. Absolutely that conflict permeates workplaces, because think about it. You have all of these different people from different cultural backgrounds, style differences, coming together often with a common goal of trying to accomplish a project, and they want to do it in different ways. And so it's natural that conflict is going to happen in a workplace, but there are some very effective ways of dealing with it. And one of the things that we've seen over and over again is conflict is the worst in workplaces that deny it happens. So when we go into a company where they say they've called us in for mediation, and we realize that there's an embroiled conflict between two individuals that has gone on for years, we can't help but think, why wasn't this addressed earlier on? Because it is noticeable. Teams notice it, managers notice it. And so we do have a number of programs where we'll go into workplaces and customize, workshops with them so that we can address the specific things that they're dealing with, because not all workplaces are the same or dealing with the same goals. We highly encourage managers and supervisors, absolutely, to get some sort of training in a process for conflict resolution. We talk about it's a process we call the exchange, which is really interesting. It was born out of the mediation process, where you're really helping other people get into issues and come up with a solution. But it's different for managers and supervisors, because as a mediator, you are a neutral third party. As a manager, you can't be neutral, really. You have a stake in the outcome. You need to see certain things get accomplished from this.
Sure, it's a different kind of a situation.
Exactly. So how do you still kind of empower the people who are in the conflict to take ownership and responsibility of it and be part of the problem solving? So not that top down, here's what we're doing about this. What do you want to do? How do you do that in a way where you're also part of the conversation and part of the solution? So we teach that to managers and supervisors so they can take the approach of still giving their employees those tools while managing it in a way that accomplishes their goals as well.
And for employees as well, though, this can be useful as well then.
Absolutely.
And you do that kind of thing too?
We do that kind of thing as well. So we do trainings that have to do with employees who are dealing kind of frontline with customers or clients who might be coming in and frustrated. And, how do you respond to someone who you feel like is attacking you and you didn't do anything to them, but they're venting on you? And what's the right way to communicate back to them? And also just dealing with one another. How do you deal with a coworker who rubs you the wrong way or who has attacked you? And how do you respond to that? And also, what are the tools that you can use to work together? So we talk about a lot of that. Interesting,
because you're talking so much about just human nature and some personality issues here and that kind of thing. And then people, I'm this way or I'm that way. And I'm sure both of you hear people say, I don't like conflict. I don't like to deal with conflict. Or, man, you take everything so personally. Those kinds of things. And Kathryn, when you hear those kind of things, you're trained to respond in some way to a comment like that. And if I were to say, well, Kathryn, I don't want to take part in this. I'm just not in a conflict. What would you tell me? What do you say to somebody like that?
Well, I think the most important thing, you really have to encourage someone to listen to the other person. So I might say, I understand that, but, would you give, this person an opportunity to let them know to let you know how they feel and what they think. And you have to get someone to see their view is not the only view, and to really get them to have a dialogue, a back and forth conversation where it's not just about you. And sometimes you have to say that, it's not just about you. particularly if they're trying to do something that's community building or something, involving trying to get the community together, community members together. You have to remind people, all of these people showed up just like you for the same exact reason, for a common goal. So it's not just about you.
I imagine you see all kinds of people, obviously, those who are too agreeable to what you want to do, and those are totally disagreeable to what you're trying to get accomplished. And somewhere in between, there's a lot of other people. And actually, I must say that the training that you talk about has got to really be pretty intense at times, I imagine, for a lot of people.
It is.
And some self-awareness as well.
Some self-awareness comes out. I think you can't help but think of the times you didn't do it this way and could have done it better. But it's fascinating to watch people realize that they have the tools. They really do have the tools. And suddenly conflict becomes a lot less scary because it is this opportunity for change, for something better to come out of it. And not all conflicts end that way. That's the reality of it. But for most of them, they don't need to escalate. They don't need to get to the point that they do. And just kind of going back to your question about doing something with someone who just says like, I don't want to be a part of this. I don't want to. I don't care. Right. We also do something kind of called reality testing with people and asking them, what do you ultimately want from this situation? Do you want? I'm going to go back to the work example. Do you want a peaceful working environment? And they may say, I just want her to leave me alone. Right. So okay, if that's actually what you want from the situation, how are you going to accomplish that? Because ignoring the situation is probably not going to accomplish that. Not dealing with this won't accomplish it. So isn't it worth the hour we'll spend talking together to maybe get that, right? To be able to be more left alone if that's important to you. So really getting to people and saying what's happening now isn't working, clearly. So there is an investment in spending the time to do this. Speaking
of what's happening now, another issue, not only politics in the workplace, but this whole sexual harassment culture change that is happening in our country right now. And I would imagine, I don't know how often you get into a situation where you do get into a situation where he said, she said kind of disputes, and I imagine these and other things like that, some of them anyway, are part of that. How do you, any comment on the whole sexual harassment thing that maybe somebody listening in an office that runs an office or is responsible for people getting along in an office, what you would tell them, what to do about that? And it's call conflict resolution center.
Well, it's such an important issue. I think number one is that people need to feel in a safe environment to talk about it. Everyone needs to feel in a safe environment to talk about it. And that starts with, especially speaking of the workplace, that starts with leadership creating that environment. We have a program that we call empowering bystander communication. And that really addresses, what do you do if you see something, but you don't know how to approach it? And it gives individuals the tools to approach oftentimes the person they saw doing something wrong or that's kind of in a gray area, might cross the line, approaching them early on and saying, I need to talk to you about this. I wasn't comfortable. I don't think this is right. But everyone is terrified of doing that because naturally you're worried you're going to create defense mechanisms go up in the other person, or you're going to create a big problem. But we believe that if people can intervene earlier before things escalate or become an issue, hopefully some of these terrible situations that have happened could be avoided or addressed earlier on so they don't escalate to actual harassment or assault.
I imagine that bystander that you're talking about is pretty common. And as you said, if the bystander is able to do something that is constructive and leads to some sort of revelation or conclusion or resolution, I mean, that can prevent some problems too.
And that's the goal, right? Is that these things don't even happen. So creating a safe space where everyone can talk about it, but also just taking proactive steps to try to prevent it from happening at all.
Kathryn, when you're out there in the field and you're doing these mediation and talking to people and listening to them and guiding them, what do you have you found to be your greatest challenge in all of it?
I think a big challenge is that everyone doesn't often feel like they get to have their voice heard. Very often you have a couple of charismatic people who sort of run things and lead all, and, dominate the conversations. And so, particularly since I've been working with NCRC, we do what we call community building circles. And when you have a meeting in a circle, as opposed to everyone is sitting at desks and one person stands at the front and leads the meeting, when you do it in a circle, everyone has the same voice. We use something called a talking piece. So if the talking piece is not in your hand, you don't get to speak. Mm-hmm. And it goes around the circle so that everyone gets an equal chance to say whatever it is that they need to say. And I think that helps to not only de-escalate things, but give everyone a sense of being equal in the conversation.
It's interesting, listening to you, and we've all who have been in the workplace for whatever length of time, we've been through team building experiences and those kinds of things. But what I'm hearing you both say is that's all well and good. But if nobody's really listening to each other or looking to find ways with a goal of improving whatever the relationship might be, you can do all the team building in the world, I guess. There's nothing much is going to happen.
Right. There are specific skills that are important to use. And those skills have to be utilized and taught so that change happens, right? So that something comes out of it. And I will be the first person to say, it's not easy. Avoiding conflict, much easier. Right. Being a bull in a china shop and just domineering someone, much easier. Taking the time to do this process is harder. Listening to someone, opening your mind, all of these things stretch you and they're harder. But the long-term benefits are what we constantly go back to with people. When they get tired and they think, why am I doing this? Why am I invested? It's those long-term benefits. And so for everything, whether it's a workplace conflict or literally sitting around the holiday dinner table with family and talking about tough issues like politics or things you don't agree on, what is your long-term goal from this situation? And so is it worth the time to have a civil conversation?
Listening to you both, it's very encouraging. And I'm sure a lot of people listening to you is like, I know I've got these issues and problems, but I want to get to that place. And it sounds to me that's where you want to take place. You want to get somebody to that place, whether it's a marriage or a workplace situation, where they really want to be if they stop and think about it, right?
Yes, and it's attainable. Absolutely.
And that's what you said twice, three times now. You're capable. People are capable of doing this.
People have they have the ability.
They just don't know how.
And we can help kind of provide some of those skills and pulling that out. But.
Well, we've only got a couple of minutes left, but I want to give each of you just a quick chance to just say a final word to our listeners. Kathryn, what would you want our listeners to know?
Well, just like Ashley said, I want people to know that they do have the ability, they have it right in them to be able to resolve conflicts on their own, or often sometimes it has to be facilitated by someone, but to take those first steps. And it is hard. We're all used to doing what we do, the way we do it, particularly when it comes to families. There's always that hierarchy. But I strongly believe in the circle process. When you have to look someone in the eye, sometimes it's harder to say what you might say if you're behind their back or under the cover of social media. Mm-hmm. So look someone in the eye and speak to them, and then you can be heard and they can be heard.
Of course, you can contact the National Conflict Resolution Center at their website at ncrconline.com. But Ashley, I hope that in talking to you today and our listeners hearing what you had to say, I hope they're hearing what I'm seeing and hearing from both of you. You're very positive people, and you exude that positivity, if you will, out there. And I hope a lot of our listeners are picking up on that. Is that kind of what you walk into the office in every situation? I mean, you must have a very positive view of people and their future.
Yeah, I mean, it's surprising that we spend all day dealing with conflict, and we do have a positive view of people because we see the transformation that comes out of it. So, this is just kind of scratching the surface of all of the resources available. But I encourage any listeners that want to know more to definitely visit our website, ncrconline.com. And also, we are all over social media. So we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, Instagram, and we're constantly posting relevant, good content on there as well that's easily digestible for that day. So if you're looking for just a daily boost of something, it's a great resource.
That's great. And that goes for employers, employees, neighbors, and family, husbands and wives, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Well, both of you, it's been a pleasure talking with you, and I know our listeners have very much enjoyed listening to you, and hopefully they're uplifted and want to do something about it. And and contact the National Conflict Resolution Center to remove the conflict in their lives. And we really appreciate what you're doing in our community around the country, and keep it up.
Thank you. Thanks for letting us share.
Much. Thanks for having
Ashley
us here.
Virtue, the Director of External Relations, and Kathryn Shade, Senior Program Manager with the National Conflict Resolution Center. Once again, their website, ncrconline.com. I'm Cliff Albert, and thanks for listening to the program this week.